Barakatuh. Good evening, everyone, and good morning to all our participants joining us from the US. Welcome to the 186th session of Majlis Al Khonji via Zoom, and thank you all for joining us today. Our guest today is one of the regular speaking personalities on economic topics at Majlis Al Khonji. Please allow me to introduce him, Dr. Abdullah Al Bahrani, PhD holder from the University of Kentucky, and is an accomplished professor of economics and associate dean for graduate studies and research in the Haile College for Business at Northern Kentucky University. He has earned recognition for his research in household financial decision, specifically his study on demographics differences in financial literacy and the impact on financial education in reducing the financial literacy gap. His exceptional work earned him the Best Research
Am
Paper
I the only
Award
one that
from the
has
National
lost?
Economics Education Association. Dr. Abdullah is a sought-after content expert, and he has been invited to speak at a prestigious institutions like the Federal Reserve Bank System, Association of Economic Educators, and Business School Administrators. He is also a nationally recognized economic educator and received the prestigious Kenneth Elzinga Distinguished Teaching Award. As a commitment to increase economy literacy, Dr. Abdullah has a weekly newsletter and podcast where you can sign up to receive updates at www.withdra.com. This will be posted in our chat. Welcome, Dr. Abdullah, to Majlis Al Khonji, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, distinguished guests. This has become a regular occurrence, and I'm extremely honored for His Excellency for continuing to invite me back. It's an honor for me to be able to talk about economics. It's my passion, and I truly believe that everybody will live a better life if they fully understood economic concepts and leverage them to make decisions in their personal lives. When I talk about individuals, I also am referring to governments and policymakers. So with that, first of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm an educator at heart, so please feel free to unmute, engage in conversation. These experiences over the past couple of times that I've been on here have been very engaging for me as well as a speaker to hear from you, to understand the things that you are tackling and wanting to know more about. So I will get started with my presentation, and for your reference, my presentation is designated to be, sorry about that. You got a glimpse of the entire presentation right there. So my presentation is designated to be 30 minutes, and this is, I think, a sweet spot. Going anything longer than that would be me not utilizing this time very wisely. So please hold me accountable to that. So a little bit of background. As I said, this is the third iteration of my visits here, and inshallah, we will continue to have more conversation about economics, and I appreciate the continuous invitations. As far as a background on who I am, I think it's important to know who your speaker is and what motivates them. So Abdullah Al Bahrani, I am first of all privileged to have both my parents on here today, Abdullah Al Bahrani and Sana Sabil Al Balushi. And without them, none of this would be possible. So I'm indebted to them and grateful for them for all of their investments in me. And somewhere around here, I saw my brother, Aoun Al Bahrani. So the whole family is here. It's a family affair. I'm a professor of economics at the Haile College of Business. I'm also the associate dean for graduate studies and research. So what that means is to obtain the title of professor of economics at Northern Kentucky University, you have to be internationally recognized for what you do. So I'm happy to have reached that milestone. As far as my role as Associate Dean for Graduate Studies, I oversee roughly 800 students in our graduate programs. We have 3 graduate programs: a Master's in Business Administration, a Master's in Business Leadership and Innovation, and a Master's in Accountancy. And as part of that, I also see our international partnerships. So we have about 7 international partnerships right now where students do a 1+1. So if anybody has a university is looking to extend their partnerships internationally, we would welcome those conversations. I also oversee our research activities at the Haile College of Business. So research is the cornerstone of what I do, and it's going to come up several times throughout this conversation. If you're not familiar with where Northern Kentucky University is, we are in Cincinnati, Ohio, right across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio. I was just talking to Mike Hansen, who just learned that we are in Cincinnati, and inshallah, on your next visit to Cincinnati, Mike, I'll take you out to lunch or dinner. All right. So as far as my research focus, I have a concentration in household financial decisions. So what that means is my interest is on how individuals make decisions about their financial well-beings, whether buying houses, retirement accounts, how to manage taxes. All of these questions are really near and dear to my heart. As a continuation of that, I also look at this concept of financial literacy, and it's kind of what I've become known for internationally. How do we teach financial literacy? How do we teach people about economic and financial education so they could improve their life? At Northern Kentucky, I also oversee the Center for Economic Analysis and Development, and this is really important because on an annual basis, we do about 15 to 20 studies for either local, state, or national organizations on economic impact and economic analysis. And I have a strong team of researchers, Janet Hara, Dr. Osama Farhan, who was actually at Sultan Qaboos University up until 2 years ago. We were happy to recruit him here. And then my research assistant, Fawaz Abdulaziz, who is part of this conversation today and has helped me with my presentation today. So Fawaz, thank you for being here. All right, as far as my impact outside of academia, I've worked with the Federal Reserve Bank system, specifically Cleveland and St. Louis. I work closely with the Association of Economic Educators and Business School Administrators. We also just released a financial literacy assessment for the entire United States, 4th, 8th, and 12th graders. So we're happy that our impact is being felt at the K through 12 environment as well. And then finally, I think I'm sharing this in a humble situation, but it's something that I'm really proud to be an Omani economist in the United States and be recognized as one of the top economic educators is not only a representation of me, but it's a representation of all of you that have invested in who I am today. So for that, I am grateful. If you'd like to continue the conversation, as Raham said, I have a newsletter and a podcast with the goal of increasing economic and financial literacy. So at this point, I think you know me fairly well. So thank you for listening to that. The topic for today is taxation. And I'm going to be extremely transparent here. Outside of this arena, I've gotten requests to have an opinion on income taxes, and to be honest with you, it would be very immature of me to provide any recommendations without actually seeing a proposal. So I'm an advocate for evidence-based policy, and evidence-based policy means that you have to see what the proposal is, how to study it, and come up with possible solutions or outcomes. So our conversation today is purposefully going to be really high level, but feel free to ask questions if you want more details. And if there's something that I don't feel comfortable answering because I don't have the details, I hope you understand. So we're going to talk about why do we tax, the pros and cons of taxation. Something that I really think is important, especially in the case of Oman, is general equilibrium implications. Then we're going to talk about types of taxes and their effects, and especially in geographies where we're really close to each other, like in the GCC, the concept of tax competition and taxes and government spending. And then something that I really want everybody to think about, and that's the problem with income taxes in an oil revenue-based economy. So when it comes to taxation, the first and most popular reason that people believe that we should tax is for some reason your government revenue is less than your government spending and you need to make up that gap. Okay, this is the most common analysis of why governments tax. So their goal is to provide public goods and services. And when we mean public goods, we are talking about schools, roads, health, infrastructure, things to help the economy grow. And we could talk about what are the boundaries to the role of government, but often in most countries, other than oil producing countries, the government does not have a source of revenue. So if they don't have a source of revenue, they have to generate revenue to cover those government spending liabilities. So we start to hear about taxation when this equation tips. And in the case of Oman, we could talk about the sources of government revenue, and we'll go through that in a little bit. But we also, when we talk about taxation, you are also indirectly asking about government spending. And this is something that I really want to highlight. You cannot talk about introducing a tax system without starting to scrutinize spending. And this raises concerns and something that we have to be conscious and careful about. What are the other reasons that we tax? Well, maybe we are believing that income inequality in the economy is growing, and we need to level the income inequality that is happening, take from high income earners and provide for low income earners or subsidize social services. That's a viable reason for taxation. Another reason might be correcting market failures and externalities. From an economist standpoint, this is probably the most, is the reason why most economists would get behind the idea of taxation, to correct something that is wrong with the economy. And then a popular one, especially by the IMF and the World Bank, is they want you to stabilize your economy through fiscal policy, and good fiscal policy as defined by the World Bank and IMF is a diversified revenue source. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. So when we look at Oman's revenue, we said, one of the main reasons that we tax is revenue is less than spending. And when we look at the Omani revenue generation, the revenue side of the economy, we'll see that 54% of oil revenue estimated for 2024 is coming from oil revenue, and then 32% of the budget is coming from non-hydrocarbon revenue. And that light blue bar is continuously increasing with a minor dip in 2021 and 2022, and we'll highlight those years in a little bit more detail here in a couple of seconds. But that's a big chunk of our revenues already coming from diversified sources outside of oil. So with that said, let's look at where our expenditure is going. And what I said earlier, once you start to talk about taxing, then you have to start to ask, well, where's the money going? And that is a big threat and a conversation that starts and can go in many different ways. So we have to be really conscious about that. If we look at our spending here on the right, and by the way, this is all data from the KPMG as they analyze the 2024 data. So this is not my graphs, but this is borrowed from KPMG. If you look at our expenditure, most of our expenditure goes into making the government run, right? So civil ministries is our highest proportion. Lately, we've been talking a lot about the importance of social protection and social subsidies. And if you look at it, it's right here, and it's a roughly small number part of the overall spending in the economy, right? So the majority of our spending is coming to make sure that the government is running, that the civil ministries are operating. So once we start to introduce the concept of taxation, we have to start to ask, where's the money going? And here's the answer. As far as that equation, revenue minus expenditure equals either a deficit or a surplus, and I think everybody on this call is very familiar with our surplus and deficits. This, once again, is a KPMG report. So the way to read this is the light blue are years of surplus, the dark blue are years of deficit. And I think everybody over here knows all the reforms and the changes in government expenditures in 2020 And I'm happy to say that the data indicates that those reforms have changed the state of the economy. So we are moving more towards surpluses. So if we're starting to ask, are we in the red? We are no longer in the red. So why are we talking about this concept of taxation? Is it because of this situation? Well, we don't have any evidence that this situation requires any taxation. So what is the actual reason? From an overview of what are the pros and the cons of taxation. When we talk about the pros, funding for public services is the #1 pro. Some people will go as far as saying reducing inequality, and then finally influencing behavior. So these are the main reasons for taxation. Now, on the con side, and I'm going to invest a lot of time talking about the con side because I don't think we do enough of that in our conversations. Taxes create what we call economic distortions. Economic distortions, in a nutshell, is change of behavior where people are not doing what's optimal for them. So whenever we introduce a tax, we are going to change people's behavior. How much we change their behavior is going to be something that economists are going to look at and actually impacts the net revenue that is generated. The other thing is administrative cost. How costly is it to introduce a tax and maintain a tax? And any tax policy should have careful consideration to that aspect. And then finally, whenever you introduce tax, because we are human, we are going to try to avoid the tax. Remember, avoiding taxes is legal, evading taxes is illegal. So even legally, we will try to avoid a tax. We will find ways to change our behavior. So what does a careful timeline of introducing a tax look like? This is my framework, my analysis, and my thought process. Some people might beg to differ, but this is the way I like to think about taxes. First of all, tell me the purpose of the tax. We have to clearly communicate why we're introducing a tax. So is it revenue generating? Are we looking at income inequality? Are we correcting a market failure? Or are we stabilizing the economy through fiscal policy? And each one of these requires a whole marketing and educational platform to go with it. But first, we have to start with the purpose. Why? Why are we introducing a tax? So when we introduce a tax, and let's say we suggest it's to generate revenue for public goods and services. Well, once we do that, then the next viable question is, well, why do we have to do that? Is spending too high right now? Is that the problem? Can we reduce our spending? Where are we spending our money? How much are we spending? So we start to scrutinize the spending. And then the next part is, well, especially in the case of Oman, is oil revenue too low? And we saw this in 2020 when there was a drop in oil prices, and that equation, we had a lot more government spending going out than government revenue coming in. And, we might have needed to generate some revenue in that form. The next question is, okay, well, if it's not for revenue generation, it is specifically to redistribute inequality in the economy. So here we're making a case that inequality is high in this economy. So the next question is, well, how bad is inequality? How are you measuring it? And which inequality are we talking about? Are we talking about inequality of income? Or are we talking about inequality of wealth? Because the way we operationalize that and avoid this inequality are very different if we're targeting wealth or income. If we're correcting market failures and externalities, we're saying that there are some behaviors in the economy that are not optimal and actually causing consequences to other people in this economy. So what are those behaviors that we want to change, and why do we want to change them? These are all questions that anybody that is having a tax imposed on them will start asking. And then finally, do we want to stabilize the economy through fiscal policy? The next question I would ask is, well, how will taxes actually do that? What is the process and the mechanism in which we will create some counter-cyclical government spending through this tax revenue that we generate? So there has to be an explicit way in which the reals will be distributed when the economy goes through a downturn. And that transparency becomes really important once you impose a tax. So once we covered the tax, well, what's the next question? The next question is, what's my tax base? So my tax base is, what am I actually taxing? So when we talk about income, what is the income that we are going to tax? Each individual has different sources of income, and we have to define those. And then if we're talking about, for instance, wealth inequality, are we trying to tax wealth? How do we do that? How do we tax income? These processes are really important. So when it comes to wealth inequality and you're trying to eliminate wealth inequality, then an income tax is not going to solve your problems. What you want to do then is to implement a property tax, a corporate tax, or inheritance tax. And nowhere in the world do I know where these are extremely favorable ways of imposing a tax. You know, the concept of people have exerted effort to generate wealth, and they need to be able to retain that is a common theme across the world. When it comes to income, we have what's called earned income. Those are your labor hours. When I go to work, I earn income, and therefore that has a tax. Or there's also income that I generate in passive form, capital gains. If I buy a house and I sell it, or if I have stocks, dividends coming in, then are we taxing those at different rates like they do in the United States? So in the United States, your earned income has a different tax rate than your capital gains tax rate. These are all things that we have to think about when it comes to tax bases. What exactly are we defining as income, so we could clearly know what is on the table that will be taxed? Anything that is not clear creates gray areas and increases the probability of evasion, or evasion that is not intended. Let's put it that way. Next up, we have to define our tax rate. So each of these concepts that I'm talking about over here is a semester-long series of lectures to define, and we're going over these really quickly. So I'm sure our Q&A portion will involve a lot of questions. But there is such thing as an optimal tax rate. And when you talk about the tax rate, you're also deciding if it's a progressive, regressive, or proportional tax rate. So anybody working in taxes, whether you agree or disagree with the Laffer curve, what you see in front of you here is a concept called the Laffer curve. Arthur Laffer is a living economist, and he's actually made his living based on this graph. And in fact, on Tuesday, I'm going to see one of his colleagues present on this concept of taxation. And he's gone to different states and cities to introduce this concept. So what we're seeing over here is on the x-axis, the bottom, is your tax rate going from 0 to 100%. And then on your y-axis is the government revenue that you will generate. So according to Arthur Laffer, at earlier tax rates, small tax rates, you will generate revenue. Eventually, you will get to a maximum. And at that maximum, any additional taxes that you will introduce will cause people to reduce either their effort or avoid the tax, and therefore your tax revenue will fall. What's really important here is that T star, that optimal tax rate, varies by jurisdiction. It varies by people's willingness to change their behavior. If people are willing to change their behavior drastically, then that T happens at really low tax rates. If people are what we economists call sticky in their behavior, then this will happen at high tax rates. So what this means is we cannot look at different countries and say, oh, this is what they imposed, and therefore we need to impose the same tax rate. There has to be careful studying of how do people change their behavior, or what economists call elasticity, across jurisdictions. And the tax rate that happens in Muscat might be very different than the tax rate in Salalah or anywhere in between. So this is where people that oppose tax rate usually say, well, if you're going to impose a tax, make sure it happens at the local level, not at the national level. Because, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, that creates distortions between the states, the jurisdictions, or the governance. So once we define our tax rate, then we move on to this idea of who's going to administer this tax. What is the entity that is going to administer this tax? How are they going to ensure compliance to the tax? How are they going to collect the tax? Mike and I were just talking about the tax in the United States. Every April is a high anxiety time because I don't know exactly what my taxes will look like. And then usually I need to extend, and it's a black box that nobody truly understands. And that causes issues with enforcement, and it's all due to the complexity of the tax system. So there's the administrative cost from the government, the entity that is collecting the tax, but there's also administrative cost or administrative burden on the tax filer. And what ends up happening is when these costs are really high, it makes taxes unfavorable no matter how good of a social problem that they're facing. So if you're thinking about a tax system, making it as streamlined and as easy as possible is probably the best way to move forward. So we've administered the tax. Next, we have to anticipate that there's going to be tax avoidance, evasion, because people are going to change their behavior. Okay, and the reason that this is important, because I've seen a lot of governments, local or state level governments, introduce taxes, and they take their current tax base. Okay, let's say that there's an economic activity of $100 million. And they say, well, if we impose a 3% tax rate, we're going to have $300,000 in revenue at the end of the year. Well, that's a false analysis, because once you impose the tax, your tax base is actually going to shrink because people are going to avoid it. They're going to change their behavior. So what you usually see is at the state level, and we've seen here in Cincinnati, the government imposes a tax, and then at the end of the year, their revenue is less than what they expected. So now they have to up the tax rate, and now you are hurting your citizens even more by imposing that tax cut or that pain twice. So carefully considering how your tax base shrinks because people are avoiding taxes is part of the analysis. Money will move. All right. So with that said, this is the point that is more Oman specific, if you may. We have to look at the general equilibrium implications of taxation, meaning that when we impose a tax on one market, it's going to cause changes in other markets. Okay. So if we tax income, this is going to impact capital markets. It's going to impact foreign direct investment. It's going to impact the flow of riyals inside of and outside of Oman. And we have to think about those consequences, not just the income analysis, but also the other markets that are impacted by this tax. We know people will change their behavior. And then when it comes to general equilibrium as well, we have to separate this idea of who is responsible to pay the tax versus who actually pays the tax. Okay, so let me operationalize this with respect to Oman. Let's say I want to impose a tax. Do I impose the tax on the employee, or do I impose the tax on the employer? So who is responsible to send the check at the end of the month or the end of the year to the government? That is what we mean by who is responsible to pay the tax. Who actually pays the tax means, let's assume that we impose the tax on the employer. The employer is supposed to collect the tax and send it. Let's assume that's the case. Well, is that going to cause wages to decrease, or is the employer going to eat that cost? So we have to think about these things. There's the tax incidence and then the legal responsibility to pay the tax, and those are not usually the same entity. As far as taxes, I think in Oman we're familiar with indirect taxes and the GCC as a whole, value-added taxes. The good thing about indirect taxes is everybody's responsible for paying them. The bad thing about indirect taxes is they are regressive in nature, meaning low-income individuals pay a higher portion of their income, relatively speaking, towards the tax than higher-income individuals. So for the people that don't want low-income individuals paying taxes as high of a tax rate, indirect taxes are not favorable. Direct taxes, like income tax or corporate tax, we could direct exactly who's paying and how much they're paying for that. So those are the two big tax types. Obviously, there's Pigouvian taxes, like carbon tax and congestion. These are for market failure adjustments. This is something I tell my students and our local governments, everybody that I talk to, because it's a concept that I truly believe in. Money will go to where it has the highest return per risk unit. And that means if we are, as an economy, looking to attract labor or attract FDI, we want to make sure that they have the highest return in our jurisdiction. So we have to balance the need between attracting investment with revenue generation, and same thing for labor. And when it comes to GCC and our population, we have to compare our tax rates to the people around us. It cannot happen in a vacuum because labor within the GCC moves, so does wealth, so does capital accumulation. And that ease of transfer between borders makes it so that people are going to change their behavior. Our tax base is going to shrink. The number of customers that we have within the economy is going to shrink as well. So we cannot evaluate our taxes without looking at comparable geographic jurisdictions. And then we must talk about taxes and transparency. I've alluded to it several times. Once you introduce taxes, there becomes accountability on where the dollar or the rials are going, to be more specific, and transparency. Who are we deciding to support in this economy? Can we have any detailed data to indicate that this need exists? So, we have to ensure transparency, communication. Otherwise, the people will not have a favorable look at taxation because it's money taken away from their hard-earned efforts and redirected. We have to make a really good cause of why they're being redirected, and then also show them the return on investment of how those rials actually impacted society in a positive way. Absent that, introducing an income tax will not be favorable to the individuals being taxed. So we have to have a public education and outreach forum. How are you telling people about the taxes? What's the campaign to educate them? And we see this in the United States. The United States, the majority of the people, actually, let me rephrase that. There's a lot of people that I know that don't like taxation, but they love the public highways. They use the public highways every single day, but they do not connect that the public highways are funded through taxes. So if you're gonna tax people, you have to show them the benefit of that. And often we just show them the cost and not enough trust is developed in the process. So what all this comes down to is whether you impose a tax or not, there has to be some evidence-based policy. And this is the third time I've been here, and this is the third time I'm going to reiterate careful analysis of the purpose, the tax base, the tax rate, the administrative cost, and then the change in behavior have to happen. So research is important, analysis is important, and academia needs to be involved. And then finally, not only academia, but we need to hear from multiple stakeholders on how they are impacted by this tax. And the reason being is we all over here have our own lens and experiences that we experience on a daily basis on our personal lives. So we will not see the complete picture without involving different people from the segment of the economy, both receiving the benefit and those incurring the cost of the tax. And it's just good governance to include everybody. The last thing that I want to talk about is this concept of income tax as a diversification from oil revenue. And, you know, the World Bank and, you know, the IMF love this policy, and they talk about it often. Here's my problem with this. In Oman, income and oil revenue are correlated. Okay? They're correlated. And we saw this in 2020. When oil revenues fall, incomes fall. So if I am looking to generate income when oil falls, I'm not going to get it from the income of the employees because their income has fallen as well. So income tax as a diversification from oil revenue is not going to solve the problem. Now, income tax during good times and then saving the money and then paying it for during the bad times, that makes sense. But we could do that with oil prices, right? I mean, we have sovereign wealth funds. That's what they do. So why is a tax required? It's not to necessarily diversify from oil. The other thing as well, and I've said this several times already, once we impose a tax, we shrink the tax base. What I would love to do is actually increase the tax base, increase more economic activity in Oman first. And when we have a thriving economy with a lot of business activity that is not relying on government to sustain it, then we could impose marginal small taxes and collect revenue that way. So I would encourage economic diversification. I would implement fiscal rules to stabilize funds. And once we start to talk about taxes in an economy, we need to ask, well, what's public financial management look like? So I've gone 11 minutes above my promised time. I appreciate you listening to me. Feel free to connect with me if you're on social media, Econ with Dr. A. If you want to get the newsletter or the PowerPoint slides, which I will send out on Monday, inshallah, you could sign up for my newsletter. I am grateful for your time, your interest, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah, for your presentation. And we'll open the floor now for the questions. So, dear guests, if you have any question, please feel free to post it in the chat or to use the raise hand option. Thank you very much.
This is Zaid Aish from Al Khonji Group. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for the presentation. In a couple of slides, you hit it right on the head. I agree with you that we need to start with why. I think the challenge is, I think it goes into the why we need to introduce tax. In the last slide, I also agree that in Oman, it's a special case that we need to study, analyze, research, to engage the people on the income tax. Totally in agreement that, constituents or taxpayers, their behavior will change. And I think, imposing income tax in Oman will have a greater negative effect. I totally disagree with the World Bank and IMF policies because they don't take in consideration local market and specialty. And if we look at some examples like in Jordan, in Egypt, in other countries where they implemented those fiscal policies, in the long term, after 25 years of implementation, it only did not fix any problems, did not fix the imbalance of economic imbalance of the fiscal policies. I think increasing economic activities through maybe some regulations and easy of process will attract more, direct investment, foreign investments. It also increase the activity and expand the economy. Then they can add a bit of charges for those things. I think the easiest way, usually economies, they will introduce taxes because it's a quick fix to imbalance of their budgets. But on the long term, I think it will, I agree with you, it will hurt the economy. And in full agreement that we need research, we need analysis, and we need to think of ways. There is actually successful models in neighboring countries that we can introduce to expand the economy, expand the activity, and focus on, the long-term objective of, the policies. Again, I thank you for, it's very solid presentation, covers a lot of points, but it takes us to more questions than answers is why we need to implement the policies. And is there a better solution? If there is a more feasible solution that can have a greater effect on overall economy and the wealth of the country and the well-being of the citizens and whoever is staying here. Thank you so much for that. I really wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Highly appreciate it.
Thank you. I truly appreciate your summary and what you have provided. As you were speaking, and this is the reason that I value these conversations, as you were speaking, something else came to mind that I neglected to include in my presentation. And there might be also a response to credit rating agencies, right? If the IMF and the World Bank want us to diversify as a signal of our strength, and we're trying to minimize our interest, our debt cost, one way to respond to those is by showing that there is a new tax source that diversifies and makes the economy, quote unquote, more resilient. So this might be another reason why these tax discussions are being presented, and they should go in my presentation. So thank you.
But in my, over working in different jurisdictions of taxes from Australia, United States, Turkey, Jordan, Morocco, UAE, Saudi Arabia, whatever, on the long term, those income tax, really, they don't create what they're looking for. Again, IMF is looking how to get, on the rating agencies, how is you're going to pay? We want to see solid things that you're going to make payments. We reduce your points, a few points here and there on your loans, whatever it is. But maybe it have a quick fix, but that quick fix will not come without a long-term cost for overall economy and the citizens. So I think, yes, again, the presentation is very solid and is very good. Us as participant, I think later on maybe another presentation on what other solution we can present to solve this fiscal imbalance, how we can lower the payments or improve our credit rating, whatever it is. At the end of the day, it's all about cash flow and about positive cash flow. And I think there is, again, some models and some examples they've been implemented, again, like Jordan and Egypt, whatever. IMF suggestion did not pay off. And the World Bank did not serve the countries as much as they serve the interests of the banks and the lending guys. So again, we need to consider all this and take maybe some answers and some suggestions that can help the economy and create a more positive cash flow into the budget and the fiscal balance. So again, I agree with you. And sometimes we feel that we are forced in the corner, but overall, I think there is other solution can enhance the economic activity and indirectly increase the inflows for the government. Thanks.
Thank you. I see some hands raised.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zaid. Okay, yeah, we have another question from Amani Lata. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate this informative slides. So basically, I grew up in Oman and part of my career was in Oman as well. However, I'm connecting from the US, so maybe I'm more accustomed to the US tax system, which makes me wonder, basically, what if we impose for Oman community benefits tax on corporation? Would that help the externalities of the load from the government? And the other question will be, considering that now Oman are leading in the carbon neutral initiatives and generating a lot of investments and as well projects to reduce the carbon intensity in Oman, would carbon tax as well would balance that budget instead of focusing on the income tax? Thank you.
Thank you. Really great questions. So the way I'll answer your questions is, what's the purpose of the tax? So let's take, for instance, carbon taxes. With carbon taxes, we are designing a tax system because we actually want people to change their behavior. So the tax is intended to shrink the tax base. So if this tax is imposed correctly, then in 5-10 years, you will not have that economic activity anymore. Okay, so we're seeing in the United States with respect to fuel, carbon, we're trying to change people's behavior to go to electric, to non-carbon based, energy. So we want them to actually change their behavior, which means in the long run, we will not have any revenue to generate from this activity. So it's not a sustainable source of revenue. When it comes to corporate tax, I think corporate tax works depending on the jurisdiction. So if you have a corporation in Oman and it is being taxed at a higher rate than it would be, for instance, in UAE, what's keeping this company from moving to the UAE? If it can move, it will move. If it cannot move, or in economic terms, their behavior is inelastic, then we will be able to extract that tax revenue. But we will be reducing the profitability of the firm. So that's the trade-off. So in a nutshell, if you're going to tax something, make sure that whatever you tax cannot move, so you could extract as much surplus from it. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take Mr. Said's question and then we'll move to the chat. Mr. Said, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for your presentation. Just like a comment, it's not really a question. I work for the tax authority, first of all. So I know the administration, and we have the corporate tax since 1971, over 50 years. And I believe we are doing so far a good job, and will continue doing that great job in area of tackling the evaders. Anyone who evade the tax, it's there. It's the human behavior in every country of the world, and we have our own tactics how to tackle those behaviors. Regarding the corporate tax, I don't know if you are following the OECD BEPS project, and they have this plan to have a minimum taxation of 15% everywhere. So all countries, they will have a minimum tax of 15%. Right now, Oman, we are at the 15%. So I think we are in the right direction. Even the countries in the GCC, they are moving towards introducing taxes, like the UAE already started, I think, last year with the corporate tax. We have it in Saudi Arabia, and I think soon we will have it might in Kuwait and Bahrain, because they have to keep the 15% minimum tax. Regarding the individual's taxation for Oman, I think I'm not sure about the policy decision, but I believe to have the system right now, it's better than we have it late, where the oil prices drop sharply. So it's better to have the system and test it and make sure it runs efficiently. So once the crisis comes, we will be ready for it. Thank you, Doctor.
Saeed, you bring up really good points, and thank you for your service in collecting taxes and making sure that everything runs smoothly. And you're correct. I think having equal treatment of taxes across jurisdiction is something that governments can get behind, because they all need the tax revenue. But whenever we have unequal taxes, this creates the movement across borders, and it's something that's very tough for Oman. As far as your last point, that's a really good point, and something that we need to discuss. If the intentions is to introduce a tax system for the future, and we build the infrastructure right now, that's a different why. And I think communicating that why clearly will get more people involved and supportive of it, rather than let's impose a tax today, and this tax base is going to be our experiment. So how we communicate that is really important. And that goes to that slide about outreach and communication. And it's something that I've been an advocate for always. It's not what you ask people to do, it's how you ask them to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have quite a lot of questions, so we'll move to the chat since we have questions here since quite a long time. So Mr. Muhammad Asiyab is saying, thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for the very interesting presentation. I totally agree with your recommendations to expand the taxable ahead of imposing new income tax. The social spending behavior needs an urgent reform so people can trust spending their money locally instead of the current stagnation of some social segments to spend their money locally. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. And then we have Dr. Abdul Jalil Al Maymani. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. What is the acceptable percentage of impact on different economic indicators on general equilibrium if the tax is imposed?
Great question. And to answer that question, this requires us to get together and define what is acceptable for us as a society. You know, Saeed just mentioned that there's a tax of 15% corporate tax, and everybody's trying to equalize this across the globe. The question becomes, if we're imposing 15% tax and we're creating a change in the tax base by more than 15%, then the ROI doesn't make sense, right? Or if we're only collecting 14% because of the leakage that happens when you impose taxes, administrative costs, that might not make sense either. So it's going to vary by what we are taxing and what us as a society deem to be acceptable. If you look at the United States, for instance, in their different measures of GDP, there's usually a discrepancy of about 3%. And that's usually what we, some of the things that we attributed to is this change of behavior or underground economy that is generated because of avoiding stating your income. That might be good for Oman, a discrepancy of 3%. It might not be, but that we have to study, we have to design it and work together to figure out what it is. And there is going to be trial and error. And but trial and error requires transparency as well.
Thank you very much. We have two questions from Mr. Khalil Al-Houthi. Doctor, thank you. You said something on these lines. If I got you right, once you impose tax, you restrict the tax base. Can you please elaborate? Yeah.
Yes. So there's different ways of looking at this, but let's look at labor, for instance. Let's say I am going to impose a tax on people in Oman that make more than 5,000 Omani riyals per month, right? And assuming that these individuals are successful, they have the high human capital can cross borders, can travel across the world. So once you impose that tax, a segment of your economy, to avoid that tax and to generate as much income for themselves, is going to travel abroad or move to pursue spaces where they get the highest return. So that tax base is going to shrink. We see that as well with corporations. You know, the first time we talked, I had just moved from Dublin, Ireland, and Dublin, Ireland is a great example of how they've pulled all of these US corporations to Dublin by giving them really low tax rates to attract their business. These corporations, Facebook, I mean, in the neighborhood that I was living in, Facebook, HubSpot, and all of these other consulting firms had set up bases in Dublin to receive this favorable treatment. Well, where did they come from? From places with higher tax rates. So that's what I mean by the tax base is going to shrink. And that is what we call avoiding a tax. And as I said, avoiding a tax is legal. Everybody should, you know, think about how to retain as much of their income as possible. And it's a human response. Tax evasion, which is what a lot of people focus on, is the illegal behavior, hiding money or filing it. And that obviously is going to exist in all economies as well. And that's why compliance and the tax authority have so much work to do, is to maintain, you know, the integrity of the tax system. But that's what I mean by tax base is going to shrink. People are going to change their behavior to avoid the tax.
And the next question, what is the optimal situation or best examples with regards to the administrative cost in percentage of imposing tax?
So as I started my presentation, I've been asked several times, what's the best? What's the best situation? What's the number? What's the marginal tax rate that we should impose? That's a difficult question because I still don't know the why. I don't know what we're trying to do with the money. I don't know how we're going to administer it, on who, what's the tax base. If we're going to tax 10 people 100% of their income, that's not as, going to be as productive as taxing 100 people 1% of their income. So it really matters. It comes down to the proposal and how people are going to change their behavior and what do we want to do with the money. Sorry, I don't have a specific number, but without a specific proposal, anything that I provide is guessing.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Mr. Ibrahim Saeed. He's saying, Oman is trying to have a positive credit rating. The credit rating agencies have been pushing for tax introduction for quite some time. How can Oman improve its credit rating without introducing certain types of taxes and hurting the overall economy?
Yeah, that's a good thing. And I will say that there are people on this call that have been spending every waking hour of their recent life focused on this and would have more information. But I would go back and look at the data from 2020 till today. And the changes that have been imposed have taken us from deficit to surpluses. And continuing on that path, that fiscal management is going to be music to the credit agency ears. So I already think we're heading in the right path. The concept of diversifying our revenue is something that we wish to get to in the future, but we have to diversify our economy first so we could spread this tax across different or to speak, mathematical terms, uncorrelated business activities or incomes. If we're going to impose a tax on the same cyclical revenue generating, then the swings are just going to get steeper. Good times, we're going to make a lot of money. Bad times, we're not going to make enough money. So I would suggest my initial inclination is to say, we're already on the right path and we're changing the credit agencies' analyses. So I think things are going well. And kudos to everybody that's been working on that really successful effort since 2020.
Thank you very much. Question from Qatra Nada Al-Khonji. Do you agree with reductions in bonuses, promotions, and consultancy expenditure to improve government spending?
I'm going to be a real economist here, and I will tell you that people should be paid the value that they generate. So the question here is, are these bonuses are in line with what the value that people are generating? And without the data, I cannot answer that. But if I see high wages, I expect high output, as so does everybody else here. And if I see lower wages, then the output should be lower. And that's the market economist in me. I don't believe in capping people's wages because they're quote unquote too high. I believe in capping people's wages if their wage does not reflect their output.
Sure, the question is not around wages or salaries. I think this is a more generic policy where there has been reduction in even allowing promotions and allowing bonuses and allowing consultancy fees in many institutions.
Yeah, so the reduction in wages and bonuses, I would say, are exactly what I just praised a minute ago, and that is fiscal responsibility due to the economic downturn. But this is what's going to happen. When the economy booms and gets better, people are going to expect bonuses to come back. So the issue that we're facing is business cycles. The economy goes up, it goes down. COVID was really impactful on the Omani economy. The restructuring that we saw in 2020 was to minimize the spending due to the downturn in the economy. So do I agree with it? It's business environment that, to speak economic terms, the demand in the economy dropped, so wages will drop in response to that. So there's not much to agree or disagree other than to point out that it's a cyclical thing. And as the economy booms, we'll see wages go up again, just as we've seen rents as well go up.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have Mrs. Mahal Lemki. She's a member of the State Council, Oman Economic Committee. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Yeah, Mrs. Mahal, we cannot hear you actually. We can't hear you. It's okay. If you are able to to leave and join again, we will just take another question. Thank you very much. Mr. Al-Fadl Al-Busaidi.
Hello, Doctor. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here.
Actually, I was watching your all videos on YouTube, and someone from your family, I think, he sent me all links when you upload any videos. It was really helpful.
Thank you.
And
Glad to hear.
yeah, I have a question regarding that. You mentioned that sometimes government applied some types of tax to change people behavior. For example, carbon tax and all these things. So since we applied that for some types of food, is there any studies shows that here in Oman, people, customer behavior change, that they start to move to healthier food or something for that, so that we are in the right direction? So we are doing.
I don't know if you see how big my smile is, because you're asking the right question. We already have imposed taxes. Can we see some behavioral change to measure the elasticity of the consumer? Now, the elasticity, for instance, on when I impose 100% tax on Red Bull, does that change 100% of the behavior or 70%? How do people change their behavior? And also, the behavior is going to be different by demographics, right? So we could expect that the youth might not change their behavior drastically, but the 40-year-olds or the 60-year-olds might change their behavior. So you're asking the perfect question. We've imposed the tax, have we studied it? I haven't seen it, not saying that it doesn't exist, but that would be a great experiment and data to collect to be able to analyze. And it's things like that we need to continue doing moving forward. What does it look like today? We impose a tax. What does the behavior look like after? And careful analysis then gives us evidence-based policy making. So you're asking the right questions, and in short, I haven't seen it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. And I suggest people who have authority on this to do some studies and research and see the result after applying all these policies and taxes. Is there because I know after applying that, we're supposed to have some people, reduce the customer behavior supposed to change.
Yes.
So, for example, if they are purchasing some type of juices that have high sugar, so they're supposed to move to healthier one. So the government going to pay less for health care.
Yes.
But if there is no change, so there is still, we did not fix the problem, and still we are in the same situation, and so we have to move to another solutions. So thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for explaining all these things. And I wish people who are interested in this to do research and studies and show us. I'm not an economist, but for me, it is important to understand how all these things connected together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Very much.
Abdullah. I wish you all the best. And in the future, I'm going also to follow your videos. And I wish you all the best, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I'll go back again to Mrs. Maha Al-Lamki. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry for that misconfusion. So anyway, my question is, I totally agree with you about public education and, you know, the outreach. I think that's very important and we don't have it. My question is, what if we increase the VAT? Will that be a better option than implementing the income tax? As I know, implementing the income tax right now, it's not really a viable or a good a policy to take. And it's what we see with our neighboring country, like Saudi Arabia has a VAT on, I think, 15%, if I'm not mistaken. Bahrain has 10%. Would that make a difference if the government does take that road? And the second thing, if you could talk about if you see the system for taxation in America, you have like a triangle. So you have the presidents, you have the jury, the legislative, and then you have the jurisdictional as well. So it's always to decide where the taxes are going, which we don't have that. We are more of a monarchy, correct? So if you can just talk about that as well, please, and let us know maybe what are the impact, the negative impact that we would have if this policy was implemented in Oman. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Maha. I appreciate that question. So I'll answer your first question with respect to increasing the VAT. Once we start to use terms better or worse, these are introducing subjective opinions. So better in comparison to what? And that would be the big debate. As far as the reason in which individuals don't like the VAT is low-income individuals pay a higher proportion of their income towards the VAT, right? So if I have to pay 5 riyals regardless of my income, people with low incomes, that's a higher percentage than people with 1,000 riyals in income. So it's a regressive tax, and people don't like regressive taxes because it's giving a break for the rich at the expense of the less fortunate, if you may. So that's the biggest question. As far as equalizing it towards where Saudi or Bahrain is, that's a viable question. Should we be different? Should we be lower or higher? And I saw a question that talks about that, and hopefully we'll get to it. As far as the second question, and I had a slide that I thought would be a bit, might be perceived wrong, but you asked the question. So I'll answer the question with respect to whenever you impose a tax, people will want their voice to be heard, right? So what are the systems in which you're allowing people's voices to be heard? Because now they feel the pain of that money coming out of their pocket, and they want to see where it's going. So that's why usually with high income tax places, you will see more democratic nations, right? Because there has to be a say in how those dollars are spent. I don't think you need to introduce democracy or change jurisdictions, but you do need to find a way to make people know where the money's being spent and have their voices be heard. And that's the thing in the United States. I mean, if they don't like a tax system, then they make their voice heard through voting. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. We'll take more questions. Actually, we have some questions in the chat, and we have Mr. Zaid. Please go ahead.
Dr. Abdullah, as a professor and economist and as an expert and the son of Oman, what would you recommend as an alternative to income tax to create more income to balance the fiscal budget or fiscal budget of the government? Do you have anything that can guide us a bit? Like, do you have a recommendation to diversify income and economy for more stability and more prosperous economy into the future? Can you share some of your thoughts and ideas as an expert, as an son of a man, and you know what's going on in the area?
Thank you. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you referring to me as an expert and a son of Oman. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about, and I spend a lot of time thinking. And His Excellency Khalil has been so gracious to invite me to share my thoughts twice before exactly on that topic of diversification. I could send you to those YouTube videos because they're 2 hours long, but I will give you the short.
Please do. Yes.
I'll give you the short response here. Oman has a great geographic area. It is a strategic geographic area that we can do more in expanding its impact. We are also on the path from east to west. So how are we centralizing logistics, commerce? How are we making people stop in Oman, whether they're corporations, labor, tourists? We need more money spent in Oman rather than sending money outside of Oman. So what does that mean? I'm a big advocate for free trade and for people to travel and go see different places in the world. But we're underutilizing our tourism, even our domestic tourism. Every time that one of you or me leaves Oman to go spend dollars or riyals outside of Oman, that's currency flight. That's dollars that don't circulate, right? So one of the things that we did a couple of years ago is we reduced scholarships to external of Oman and from outside of Oman, and make sure that they maintain their profits, their revenues within Oman. And in one of my conversations, I talked about the spillover effect of business. I mentioned that we should have Amazon headquarter in Muscat, Oman, right?
I agree.
If we have, because of our our geographic location, but once you bring Amazon, and I'm here in Cincinnati, Amazon came in, next to it came FedEx, next to it came UPS, next to it came, these supply chain hubs, and manufacturing starts to build up around it. So the spillover effect is what's missing. My argument is we should actually be paying riyals to get companies into Oman.
And that's what they do in the United States when they wanted to attract. They give them a lot of tax breaks and a lot of other things just to come.
Exactly. So we should be finding ways for money to flow into the country to diversify the base. Once you have a thriving economy that is sustainable in different segments, then once you impose a tax, people love being there. They need to be there. They're not going to leave. So we need to create a reason why people stay there.
I think maybe that will be another presentation from your side on those alternative and increase in economic activities, either through some regulations, enhancing process, increasing efficiency, investing in people. I think Oman have a unique location and unique resources. I just think they are way underutilized. And I think, if we look in that direction, I think that will help us to find alternative to income tax. I'm a big fan of the suggestions you made, and pro advocate for economic improvement more than anything else. Then once you become wealthy or rich, whatever improvement, you will be happy to pay taxes. Again, thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm at your service. Anytime you need me, I'm there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zaid. Okay, we'll go back to the few questions left in the chat. So Mr. Ammar is saying, Oman for 30 years have been disadvantaged by the fact we are the only GCC country applied corporate tax, making other GCC more attractive for foreign investment. And now we seem to want to be the first repeating the same mistake. So if you can enlighten on that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. What I will do is I'll put my academic hat on and say, you know, there's a statement there that says we are disadvantaged. My question would be, how badly are we disadvantaged? We don't actually have a measure. So this is where the need for data is really important, because once we identify that the impact of what was the tax, the corporate tax is, you know, 10 billion rials, then people can quantify that and they could see if this is valuable or not. Right now, we are talking hypotheticals. A tax causes low economic activity, which I'm guilty of in this conversation, but by how much? And these is where we need more studies. If we impose an income tax in Oman, it's going to change behavior, but by how much? So I'm not going to disagree with what you said. I'm going to say this is evidence of why we need more data analysis, because we know that the corporate tax has made companies pick other GCC countries, but how badly did it change their behavior? I don't know. And I don't think anybody, I will say, I don't think anybody knows.
Thank you very much. Another question. Diversification of economy means creating more companies in different sectors. These companies would pay tax later. So are we going in a circle? Should we have tax system or wait till the economy diversity to apply tax later?
Yeah, good question. So the assumption in that question is if we impose a tax right now, the corporations will come. And I don't think that's the case. I think we need the corporations to come first and then we tax. The example that I like to give is, you know, 100% tax rate on zero is still zero. So it's still $0. So if we don't have a tax base, we cannot tax it.
Thank you very much. Another question from Mr. Ayman Al-Blushi. As mentioned in your presentation and based on the KPMG report on expenditure, the highest budgeted amount were allocated to defense and security as well to civil services. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, from an economist standpoint, we usually stay away from the conversation on defense. We believe that sovereign nations should be able to defend themselves. So I'm going to skip over that, and I'm going to look at the civil services. And this is a question that we always ask. How much money should we be paying to maintain government activity? And can some of that money be streamlined? Are there inefficiencies in civil ministries that could be allocated or changed to private sector? These are all open for discussion. And once you impose a tax, the scrutiny increases. So I'm a fan of asking, you know, how much does it take to run a government, and are there better ways of spending that money?
Thank you. And another question from Mr. Abdul Jalil. How attracting FDI will be impacted if income tax introduced? FDI normally comes through companies, not individuals. How to deal with in countries where tax is already there for decades? It is more about business ready more than percentage of tax or existing or income tax or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. And to help answer that, I will tell you how I think about this. I think corporations are made up of profit owners. So whatever money a company makes, it passes out to its owners, stakeholders, shareholders, in the form of dividends or higher stock values. And this goes back to that question that I asked earlier. What are we considering income? Earned income or all income? Because if I have a company XYZ and it makes 100 million in profit and I get profits paid out to me, that could be taxed. And if I have a higher tax rate in Oman than I do in United Arab Emirates, then I will move to the United Arab Emirates. So what we define as income is really important. If it's earned income, then we're just looking at labor, and that has impacts. People might choose not to work because why pay that tax or work less hours? We have so many studies in the United States that are just trying to look at that elasticity of the last hour worked. But yes, even when you impose a tax on corporations, it has impact on FDI, money flight. It all goes back to that dollar or that rial once its highest return, and it'll go where it could find it.
Thank you very much. And we have the last comment in the chat from Honorable Ms. Mahal Lemki. She's saying, the reason I asked of increase the VAT option is to increase the government revenue. And since the government already has the infrastructure to implement it, thus there is no additional administrative cost in regards to the public, not all good charged VAT.
Yeah, that is a valid question to ask, and I would expect that our government officials and entities that oversee this decision should evaluate if that's a possibility before imposing an income tax. That's a possibility, yes.
Thank you very much. And we'll take the question from Mr. Mike. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Rehan, and thank you, Dr. Abdullah. And if I can just start by saying how nice it is to be with everyone. Thank you, Mr. Khalil. I would just say some observations, please. That introducing a tax system is actually another component, a tool of the whole economic system. So in this conversation, it's worth just remembering that it mustn't be taken in isolation. Actually, the fundamentals of the economy, in the case of Oman, the importance of revenue from oil, its volumes, its price volatility, actually make a tax system, in my view, crucial to bring in for sustainability and robustness for the future. This is one. However, I think it's important, if I may say, but you have to be sensitive in the application of taxation on the impact on economic growth and on confidence of people, even myself as a foreign investor, in wanting to choose a country to do business in. I think the last 2 to 3 years in Oman have really moved in the right direction in terms of confidence, in terms of attractiveness, in terms of a place to come to do business, because as Dr. Abdullah makes so well, Oman's location, its systems, its investments to date in its people, in its infrastructure, make Oman a great choice. But unfortunately, there's a little bit of legacy that we have to recognize and work and navigate. I'll give you 2 examples, if I may. And it starts on the premise that money, and I'm not saying labor, but talent, more expensive talent, creative, innovative talent, can move. It's really, I live in the States now, but I used to live in Oman for 32 years, but I left. This is a more attractive country for me to live in at the moment, sadly, but I would have chosen Oman with different circumstances. So this mobility of money and talent is my premise to saying that when several years ago, some of you may remember, but the tax authorities in Oman introduced a withholding tax on foreigners' dividends from Omani companies. I had to pay that tax, and it caused me to reinvest, to exit the Muscat Stock Exchange, mostly, and reinvest in Qatar, where I didn't have to pay the withholding tax. Now, I agree with Dr. Abdullah. It's worth looking at metrics, at outputs, to see the impact of a change in policy or the imposition of such a tax. My understanding is that withholding tax enabled Oman to collect about 3 million riyals in 5% dividends from foreigners. But they lost plus $150 million in investment in Omani companies, because you're not going to do that if you're treated unfairly, because capital and talent must be treated fairly, otherwise it will exit. Or at worst, or at best, it's a barrier to entry to the market. I'd make this point. I'd also say that any introduction of taxes cannot happen without testing and understanding the impact with neighboring countries. We have two powerful economies in the UAE, and nowadays you have to include Saudi Arabia. We have the road going directly Oman into Saudi. I mean, they're competitive. And two sectors, particularly in business in Oman, that we should be leaders. I love speaking as an Omani based on my time from Oman. I love Oman. I think you know that. But I think we have to be sensitive on taxes, tariffs, that impact the distribution services, logistics. The point made of Amazon is well made. But it's generally because the region generally is still dependent on an inflow of goods from overseas, whether it's from the east or whether it's from the west. But they come in, and Oman is a natural entry point. And so being sensitive to taxes to enable a competitive advantage is one. The second is tourism, because people move, and the way the UAE has grown, the way Saudi Arabia is promoted. Honestly, I sit here in America, I see fantastic advertisements of Saudi Arabia to come to come as a tourist, where 5 years ago you wouldn't even think about that. I wouldn't anyway. Today, I have to say, you have footballers on the TV saying how good Saudi Arabia is. And it is. And it is beautiful. And so is Oman. But we have to be sensitive in the application of any taxes that we don't destabilize and affect our tourism business and our distribution business. And honestly, I think in the tourism business versus the UAE, I do think there is an imbalance at the moment. I do think Oman is at a competitive disadvantage because of the Omani taxes affecting the tourist business, in my opinion. And I'd conclude by saying absolutely, Dr. Abdullah has it, and I see it here in America with the way the migrants are coming in, and I'm not suggesting the same for Oman at all. But increasing the tax base on a sustainable basis can only be done through people, through creative people with enterprises, making money, creating value. And Oman must go down this route because it cannot be. Oil has served such a good purpose and value for Oman for many years. It's such a beautiful country. It's got such great people. But it needs more, and it's time to grow, and it's time to do better in the economy, and tax is just a part of that, but an important part and a crucial part. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much for your input. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mike. We have another question from Lamid Ibrahim Saeed. Please go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Abdullah.
Ahlan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We really appreciate the conversation. It was really of great value and benefit. You know, economy, after all, it is everything. If you are strong economically, your education will be strong, your health services will be strong, everything. It's all about the economy. I mean, I think that is one of the most important things. And to be honest, we are proud to really have you as an Omani to be based also in the United States with this expertise. And my wish really is to see a wider base of Omani economists in the long term. And I wish I see you, Dr. Abdullah, to be involved really in this I will call it initiative, to have really more Omani educated economists, because in the long term, that will have a really a massive spillover on the future of Oman. This is my wish, and I really appreciate you to have this conversation with all of us, and it was really great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just to confirm, your wish is also my wish. I wish there's more Omanis working on this research together. And I can tell you that there are conversations of Omani economists getting together to solve these issues and actually have insight to share. But yes, we have a lot of work to do, and I'm at your service.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have from Bahrain, من مملكة البحرين, Mr. Ibrahim Zainal. Mr. Ibrahim, حياك. Do you have any questions? لك أي مداخلة؟
Thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor, for the very excellent presentation. Let me just tackle 3 points that you raised. First of all, that there must be a reason for taxation. And then you say that most of the oil revenues at the moment, or at least most of the GCC countries, they got enough oil revenue, so why taxation? And thirdly is how to be the transparency of how the revenue or the income from taxation is spent by the authorities. I'm not talking just about democracy, but there must be some sort of clarification. If you take from me some taxes, I should know how it is spent. Don't you think, Doctor, we should, first of all, tackle these 3 points before we go and start taxation? Because taxation could also reduce the foreign investment, reduce the activity of some companies, and negatively affect the economy and the income of the people. We are talking about corporate taxation and individual also taxation. Now, with most of the individuals, let me be very frank and straightforward, in Oman and in Bahrain, the majority of the income of the individuals are limited. So once you start also taxation without any limitation, you would encounter some social problems. Now, distribution of wealth is a must. And I think for that reason, being a Muslim, you even didn't consider the factor of zakah. Now, if you are taxing a company, and at the same time, I don't say that all the individuals and the companies abide by the Sharia and by zakah, but there are certain percentage of the people who respect the religion and applying the zakah. So in other words, those people will be taxed twice, one to comply with their belief and religion belief, and once by the governments. I think these are all points that need to be tackled before we think of applying taxation. VAT has been applied in Bahrain, VAT has been applied in Saudi Arabia, and as you correctly said, it is hitting the pocket of the end user or the consumer and not the corporates or the rich people. That I don't think is the correct way, because at the end, the people with limited income will suffer. Anyhow, thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah, and I hope that I am not disturbing you, but good luck. I am proud to see an Omani with that expertise and knowledge. Thank you very much.
That means a lot to me, and your comments are right on point 100%. And, you know, when we talk about zakah is, you know, your own giving of your own money, but it still follows the same anticipation of ROI, right? So where we put our money, our personal money, we're still wanting to know how it's being spent. How is it impacting the people that we provide money to support? So if we're scrutinizing our own spending, and there's a lot of business individuals here, you know that when you put your money into any investment, you want to know what the outcome is. Same thing with our taxes. We have no problem paying taxes if we know it makes an impact and we see the impact. So you're right on point. I just wanted to add a little bit more my own personal perspective to your wise words. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to give actually the final comment to His Excellency Abdullah Al Bahrani. Thank you very much. If you can just unmute. Yeah, thank you.
Did you say Abbas Al Bahrani?
Yes.
What you are expecting? I'm a listener like you are. I enjoyed being with you here. I'm so happy to see my son at that level. And I hope that you all enjoyed the discussion, and also we learned. I hope you also learned a little bit. And I hope to see him again. It's good being here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. The floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I appreciate you all, and inshallah we will meet again and continue this conversation. Your Excellency, thanks for making sure that I always have a platform in your Majlis, and inshallah one day we will do it in person.
Thank you very much. Dear guest, we have reached to the end of our session today. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for the very insightful talk today. And thank you to all for your participation. This session is recorded and will be available at Majlis Al Khonji YouTube channel. Thank you very much all.
مع السلامة. شكرا جزيلا دكتور عبد الله.